properly, apparently. That was the complaint. Do you expect singers to talk to you when you go to their concerts?
For $200, I expect them to dress up like a banana. Quite frankly, because the days when it used to be relatively inexpensive to go to a concert, because it is a concert,
yes.
The prices have just escalated in the last few years, and that doesn't count the heinous amount it costs to get a cold drink. So I'd like to be entertained. I'm not terribly sure that looking at a grumpy, wizened old man for 2 hours is worth a couple $100.
Even if want a social connection, you know.
Even if he is Bob Dylan, yes.
Yeah, they want to feel some connection there, and that's why like Dave Grohl's so amazing, and people have even enjoyed. I said that Katy Perry, like even though maybe she's not super amazing sometimes, like her energy that she presents is I think what people love.
I thought you were going to say David Gray for a moment, and he once played he once played Auckland and didn't say a word and didn't take his jacket off on a hot night, and he began sweating a lot. And the audience started talking to him saying, "Take your jacket off."
I've never been to a Foo Fighters concert, and I always have wanted to go. Or I've been all over the world, and I've never managed to make it to one. I want to go to one. Yeah,
I think.
I never have.
I do think that there is a generation of older artists who probably started their careers in small, dingy little venues and still have a kind of attitude towards that, which I think is kind of cool. But if you're trying to pack out a stadium with 40,000 people, I do think you have an obligation to the people who've shelled out a not inconsiderable amount of money. So I would actually consider that rude, and I'd leave.
Really? Okay. Ending on a serious note, because the employers have warned some employers of a looming crisis if New Zealanders keep turning their noses up at available work. This is from the New Zealand Herald today, from the trucking, kiwi fruit and aged care industries, especially in the Western Bay of Plenty. Attracting and retaining staff a barrier to growth. 40% of the Western BOP businesses look overseas. We've asked this before, but we never get an answer. I mean, what is the upshot? If we need to keep the economy moving by importing employees, aren't we simply growing all the time a cohort of people here who won't work?
Well, I mean, I do think working in some of the aged care facilities, okay, they've had a big break in the last year over their salaries, but, the kinds of work they do, which quite frankly I would not like to do in aged care facilities, and the miserable amounts that many of them are paid is just appalling. So maybe the people who are not finding the employees should look at their own, wage scales, and the same is true for fruit pickers who are basically itinerant. But I do want to applaud this new policy to encourage businesses to bring in apprentices.
Maramari.
Yes.
Maramahi.
Yep, from long-term unemployed. I cannot applaud that enough. I think that's a wonderful idea, and big ups to it. But, really, if you can't fill a job in this country, and we have a very low unemployment rate, only about 6%, it's probably because you're not paying enough.
There's no wage rise fairy, though, is there, with a magic wand? And that's the thing, even if you're right, and I'm not saying you're not. That's Dina, last word from you.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Money isn't magic, so, yeah, people are going to have to work for it, and they've got to be right for the job.
I'll leave that as the last word. Thank you. Dean Hall has been on the panel today. I hope your traffic flow improves.
Oh, no. Take me 10 minutes. It'll be a disaster.
Take care. Kia ora.
Dean Hall and Ella Henry. Kia ora. Thank you, Ella. Always a pleasure. And we are back after the weekend. I hope you have a good one, whether you're working or not. And Checkpoint is coming right up.
Tōtu mai rai, hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere hei kaupapa, kei te karawhio. Welcome to Checkpoint. Tonight, a little boy wearing a blue UNICEF backpack with blood dripping from a serious head wound becomes the face of the brutal war in Yemen after dozens of children on a school bus were killed in an airstrike. The government announces single-use plastic bags will be gone in a year's time. The news Lumsden didn't want to hear confirmation its maternity centre will close. A New Zealander living in Indonesia gives a first-hand video account of the utter devastation in Lombok. And history is about to be made at Mount Smart Stadium with the first mother and son combo to take the field. Warriors second rower Isaiah Papali'i will play the Newcastle Knights, but not before he watches his mum play in the curtain raiser.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat in aho. The Lumsden Rural Women's Network has reacted angrily to the decision to close the Southland Township's birthing centre. The Southern District Health Board announced today the centre will be shrunk to what it calls a maternal and child hub, where babies are delivered only in an emergency. Cheryl Clearwater, who chairs the network, says the birthing unit is a pillar of the community and the DHB needs to reverse its decision.
Keep the damn thing open. Don't close it. The ones who have got babies at this point in time in government, I would like to see you ones travel a full hour in labour pain, getting to a hospital to have a baby. Would you have closed Lumsden Maternity Home?
Cheryl Clearwater says the closure shows a lack of understanding of how remote Lumsden is. The town, with a population of about 400, is located halfway between Queenstown and Invercargill. A decision by the Ministry of Justice not to renew its mortuary services contract at Taranaki Base Hospital has been met with disbelief. The decision, part of a national review of coronial support services, means future post-mortems will be done in Palmerston North or Hamilton. New Plymouth man Rob Tucker, whose daughter Philippa died in 2009 when she fell from a balcony, says it's unthinkable that at such a difficult time a loved one could be taken out of the region.
It would be like Big Brother taking over and saying, well, you've got no more rights over the body, especially if the body is taken out of the province. I think that's terrible.
Rob Tucker says the decision smacks of penny pinching at the cost of core services. The ministry says it's confident the new service will be an improvement. Grieving relatives on Lombok have been burying their dead as aftershocks continue to rock the island. Reporting from Lombok, Rob Ovadia of Australia's Channel 7 says the aftershocks have everyone on edge.
The fact that this can happen at any time already makes people on edge to go indoors. So in terms of the relief effort, you are having to deal with many, many tens of thousands of displaced people now living outdoors. So you have to find sanitised water for them. You have to find medicine as well, food. And Lombok geographically is an extremely tricky terrain. It's widespread. There are many isolated villages. It's very, very hilly and difficult to negotiate as well. And to add to that, communications are down. So contacting some of those isolated villages has been extremely difficult as well.
Rob Uvadia. The official death toll from Monday's 6.9 quake stands at 259. A New Zealand bikie who was involved in a notorious brawl on the Gold Coast 5 years ago has been arrested and will be kicked out of Australia. The Queensland Police detained 28-year-old Jim David Thacker at Benley, south of Brisbane, and handed him over to Australian border officers. Graham Acton reports.
The Broadbeach gang brawl sparked the Queensland State Government's introduction of the toughest and most controversial anti-bikie laws in Australia. It also led to a crackdown by the Federal Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton on non-citizens committing crimes on Australian soil. Thacker, who was sentenced in 2014 to 150 hours community service, is now in immigration detention in Sydney, but a date for his deportation is yet to be confirmed. He does have the right to appeal against deportation, but only once he is back in New Zealand. This is Graham Acton.
A former Auckland High School teacher accused of doing indecent acts on boys can now be named. He is Benjamin Swan, known as Benji Swan. Edward Gay reports.
Mr Swan, who denies 10 charges relating to 7 boys, was given name suppression when he first appeared in the Manukau District Court last September. He's held a teacher certificate for 30 years and has taught at other schools, the last of which was Otahuhu College. According to the Education Council's register, he's voluntarily agreed not to keep teaching. His trial is due to be held in April. I Tāmaki Makoto ko Edward Gay aho.
The big fire that flared up at the port of Tauranga this morning is almost out. Dozens of fire crews were called after the fire broke out in a mechanical workshop and an adjoining office building. The Bay of Plenty Fire Service says there were no injuries and the fire is now under control, but it's not yet known what caused it. It's 5:04. Sport. Rowing New Zealand's high-performance manager has unexpectedly resigned. It was confirmed today that Alan Cotter, who's been with Rowing NZ since 2008, is stepping down. His decision follows an independent review of the organisation's culture. However, Cotter won't leave until after next month's World Championships in Bulgaria. The Women's Warriors side make their long-awaited debut tonight when they play Auckland in an historic trial game at Mount Smart Stadium. While the official women's NRL competition doesn't start until next month, the game will give coach Louisa Avaika a better indication of her side's competitive strength. Avaika, the first female coach in NRL history, says she's feeling more excited than nervous.
The first time ever our team's been able to represent this club. Everything's a first, so all the excitement around that, but also because it gives us an opportunity to play against a competitive side so that we can see where we're at in terms of all the trainings that we've had.
Louisa Avaiki. Tonight's game kicks off at 6 o'clock. Wallaby skipper Michael Hooper has signed a new 5-year deal with Rugby Australia. Unveiled in Sydney today, the highly lucrative deal will take the New South Wales Waratahs captain through to the end of 2023, meaning he'll be available to lead Australia at the next 2 World Cup tournaments. That's the news.
Tonight on Night's Country Life visits an orchard which doubles as a live music venue. Dudley Besden is our Friday night live act. And we have a sonic tonic dedicated to ageing because, well, it's either that or death.
And now we welcome Don Brash. And before he speaks, I'd like to remind everyone that this is a respectful forum.
The crowd was really the thing that stood out most of all, incredibly lively, and, at one point a scuffle broke out and Don Brash was actually booed from the lectern.
It's Lately with Karen Hay, 10 p.m. weeknights on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Mainly fine with areas of morning fog. However, isolated showers in Northland today, spreading elsewhere tomorrow. Waikato Waitomo Taumaranui, Bay of Plenty and Taupō. Fine, apart from areas of morning fog. Taranaki to Kapiti, also Taihape. Isolated showers clearing tonight, fine tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington. A few showers spreading north to reach Hawke's Bay by evening and Gisborne tomorrow morning, then clearing south of Napier. For all of the South Island, mostly fine but isolated showers about Nelson and Marlborough today and areas of morning fog or low cloud tomorrow. The Chatham Islands, rain clearing this afternoon but remaining cloudy. It's 5:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us on a Friday night. We begin tonight in Yemen, which the world's media has largely been looking away from for years. There's been a civil war there since 2015. The death toll is unknown, but both UNICEF and Human Rights Watch estimate it to be reaching tens of thousands, and it's exacerbating a humanitarian catastrophe, with both sides impeding the delivery of desperately needed aid. But overnight, our time, there was a single event so appalling, even a world indifferent to Yemen's suffering couldn't fail to notice it. An airstrike that killed dozens of people, including at least 29 children on a bus or passenger truck. The airstrike came in a rebel-held area in the country's north. The Saudi-led coalition, which receives what's called, and I quote, logistical support and funding from the US and the UK, and is backing the Yemeni government in the civil war, says the strike was part of, and again I quote, a legitimate operation. Now, just a warning, if you're watching, some of the pictures are disturbing because the event itself is disturbing. Here's Lucy Fielder from Reuters.
He was travelling on a bus when the airstrike hit and is still wearing his UNICEF school bag as he's carried into the hospital. Scores of people were killed in Saudi-led coalition airstrikes in northern Yemen Thursday, according to the International Committee of the Red Cross. Most were children, its head said in a Twitter post. The attack hit a crowded market in the town of Dahyan in Sa'ada province, the Iran-aligned Houthi movement's main stronghold.
The strike happened in the middle of the market and it targeted a bus carrying children. Our shops were open and shoppers were walking around as usual. Those who died were residents, children and shop owners.
The Western-backed alliance fighting the Houthis said its target was missile launchers used to attack a southern Saudi city on Wednesday, killing one. And it accused the Houthis of using children as human shields. Coalition airstrikes have killed hundreds of civilians at hospitals, schools and markets since Riyadh and its allies intervened in Yemen's civil war in 2015. More than 10,000 people have been killed altogether. Western powers provide arms and intelligence to the alliance, drawing criticism from rights groups.
That report in from Reuters. Bismarck Swangen is with UNICEF in Yemen. If you'd like to support UNICEF's work there, they would be very grateful, of course. He says the bus bombing is just one example of a catastrophic war that has killed many thousands of people directly and indirectly. Infrastructure has been destroyed, meaning water and sanitation services simply don't exist in some areas. Starvation has become brutally common, and 2 years ago, UNICEF estimated a child was dying every 10 minutes from preventable diseases such as diarrhoea, malnutrition and respiratory tract infections. So the bus bombing may at last force the world to look at what's happening there. I spoke to Bismarck just before we came on air, and he told me what he's heard from the UNICEF workers who've been at the scene.
Our teams were on the ground. They reported very chaotic scenes following the attack because a number of injured children were rushed to the nearby health facilities. There were also dead children who were being carried away by either relatives or people from the vicinity of the attack who were frantically trying to basically do what they could do at the moment. So the scenes were extremely very chaotic. It was very difficult to speak to any of the survivors to get a clear picture of exactly what happened. And so that's the latest that we have from our teams, who continue to be on the ground and try to get more details. So at this stage, even if the attack took place yesterday, up to this stage, we have not been able to get a full picture of what exactly happened. But what we know is that this was a truck which was carrying children. It is completely shredded, and you can only see a bit of the metal frame. So it speaks of the scale of the attack.
Bismarck, you were there with UNICEF. Is there a sense of desperation now? Is there a sense also, because the government is backed by this coalition, the coalition is Saudi-led, and the West, as we know, from 9/11 onwards, just doesn't really want to confront Saudi Arabia with any of its ills. And so is there a sense of anger, of frustration, of fury, potentially, that incidents like this will just go unpunished and almost at some meaningful level ignored?
This is a man-made humanitarian crisis, and the solution is simple. And it is possible, I believe, to solve this crisis, is to end the war. And so it is really upon the parties to see that there is no sense at all in fighting a war in which children are being killed, in fighting a war which is far expensive than peace. And I believe that the international community has a responsibility to prevail on the parties in this conflict. It is not only Yemenis who are suffering. It is the entire world that is suffering. And so the international community cannot be complacent. They have an influence on these parties, and the ultimate solution is to end the conflict. It is outrageous for innocent people, for children to continue to be attacked. Now, following the events of yesterday, if children are not killed in this conflict, those who survive then to face the challenges of lack of access to the basics of life. Families have been forced into destitution. They cannot find food for their children. Access to clean water has been severely disrupted because families have either been displaced or water infrastructure, like it happened a few weeks ago, are being attacked, and therefore cutting off populations from accessing clean water. Civil servants across the country have not been paid for more than 2 years now. So as a result, the health system is collapsing, the water and sanitation networks are not being maintained, and that's why you see sewage overflowing. Sanitation is extremely poor because the streets are littered with garbage, and this has only created the perfect storm for a public health crisis like we saw last year, one of the world's biggest outbreak of cholera.
Bismarck Swangen, who is with UNICEF in Yemen. It's 5:15. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Single-use plastic bags will be gone in a year's time. You'll still be able to buy ones, though, to line your bin or dispose of dog poo. The government's announced a plan to rid the country of the soft plastic bags used in supermarkets and shops, saying the hundreds of millions used here each year are polluting our coastlines and waterways. Many businesses have already trashed them, and consumers are increasingly using alternatives anyway, so the government doesn't expect the transition to be too hard. Here's our political reporter, Gia Garrick.
What's the favourite food of a turtle? Jellyfish. Well, these get out into the sea, and 1/3 of the turtles that we find dead in New Zealand, we've had some of these. There's some.
And so who wrote to me about that? All of you guys have. And look,
the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, picking up rubbish off the beach at Lyell Bay in Wellington with some of the hundreds of school kids she says have written letters to her about plastic bags since she took office.
I literally get hundreds and hundreds. And that really stood out to me from the time I took on this job. And it stood out to me because I make a real effort to reply to each of those letters.
And it's our sea life and coastlines these children have asked the Prime Minister to protect.
We are destroying our beach. We are littering on our beach. It's become a dump. All sorts of fish are dying. So I'm writing this because we did a beach cleanup at Petone Beach and it was terrible.
We are the ones who are letting plastic go into places where it could get into animal stomachs. If they keep eating plastic and other things that are not edible, they could sadly die.
So I think we should decrease the amount of plastic used in New Zealand by not using single-use plastic bags and bottles.
The latest petition delivered to Parliament calling for an end to single-use plastic bags was signed by 65,000 people. Today's announcement makes New Zealand the 104th jurisdiction to ban plastic bags. The Associate Environment Minister, Eugenie Sage, says she's confident New Zealanders will be able to find alternatives without too much trouble.
People are thinking about plastic bags, so they're thinking about what they consume, they're thinking about how they use plastic and looking at alternatives. So I think we are seeing that culture of change.
People heading into a New World supermarket in central Wellington today echoed that sentiment.
Well, that's great because the landfills are filling up really fast. We've got masses of plastic bags ending up in the sea and in landfills.
When you see the impact on the sea and everything, then yes, I think it's a very good decision.
I think it's absolutely brilliant. Plastic is a massive environmental problem and it's a first step.
The ban only applies to shopping bags. The likes of bin liners and bags for picking up dog poo will still be around. Retailers spend roughly $15 million a year on plastic bags for New Zealanders to carry home their shopping. Retail New Zealand's Greg Harford says businesses big and small are already moving to more environmentally friendly alternatives.
We've seen big grocery stores, department stores, hardware stores move, but also right down into small business land. We've seen small Indian spice shops in Dunedin get rid of bags and institute alternatives.
All Countdown supermarkets are ditching single-use plastic bags by the end of the year. Kerry Hannafin from Countdown says the pilot has been successful.
We've had 10 stores pilot going plastic bag free, and in those 12 weeks we've stopped 5 million bags going into the environment. 5 million bags. So I'm both embarrassed to say that we've been doing that for so long, but proud to say that we can make a difference.
Businesses are still being encouraged to recycle plastics through incentives under the Waste Minimisation Fund. And there's an expectation binning bags will see a spike in innovative alternatives. For now, the government wants the public and industry to give feedback by mid-September so they can begin the phase-out period, with the ban expected to be enforced by July next year. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Gia Garrick.
Let's head south from Parliament. Generations of mothers have given birth at Lumsden Maternity Centre. But that's coming to an end. The fight to save the Southland Centre from closing has been lost despite protests and a petition with more than 4,000 signatures urging the government and the DHB to keep its birthing services. However, supporters of the centre say they still remain hopeful the decision can be reversed. Our Otago Southland reporter Tess Brunton has more.
The closure of Lumsden's maternity centre hits close to home for Carrie Adams. 4 generations of her family have given birth at the centre, dating back to the early 1900s. It's where Ms Adams gave birth to her children. She is also a director of the charity running the centre, the Northern Southland Health Company. Ms Adams says women can no longer plan to give birth at Lumsden or be given postnatal care at the centre.
We also have these staff members that have been there and are seeing second generations come through, which is so special and is what rural communities are all about. So this is really taking the chair out from under primary rural healthcare services.
She says more than 100 mothers were supported through birth or given postnatal care at the centre last year.
This isn't a numbers thing. This is about providing a safe service for our community, for women and babies. If you remove the ability to do this, you are putting a huge amount of risk on these women who have to travel very long distances to get to another unit.
However, Ms Adams has not lost hope the decision will be reversed. She says the risk to mothers and babies is too high for the closure to go ahead. The centre announced the closure on social media, saying the directors all objected to the decision. The closure has been met with outrage from community members, including the Lumsden Rural Women chairperson Cheryl Clearwater.
Keep the damn thing open. Don't close it. The ones who have got babies at this point in time in government, I would like to see you ones travel a full hour in labour pain, getting to a hospital to have a baby. Would you have closed Lumsden Maternity Home?
Hundreds of people protested in the streets of Lumsden after the Southern District Health Board announced plans to downgrade the centre to a support hub in March. Board Strategy, Primary and Community Executive Director Lisa Jestro says maternal and child hubs will be established in 5 locations, including Lumsden, where deliveries will be made in emergencies. She says the DHB will continue to support remote rural midwives and mothers. Clutha Southland MP, National's Hamish Walker, says downgrading the centre to a non-birthing unit puts mothers and their children at risk.
Delays in getting to maternity care compromises outcomes and could put rural mothers and babies at greater risk. Some mothers will now have to travel 130 kilometres to give birth. This is unacceptable and this is just wrong.
Mr Walker says the growing population meant the situation will become more dire into the future. What's clear is that the fight is far from over for this maternity centre. For Checkpoint, this is Tess Brunton.
And after 6, we'll hear from a midwife who's worked out of Lumsden and is reconsidering what she's going to do if that primary care centre closes. A decision by the Ministry of Justice not to renew its mortuary services contract at Taranaki Base Hospital is being met with disbelief in the Taranaki region. It would mean once the contracts are finalised that all post-mortems for Taranaki would be done in Palmerston North or Hamilton. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
Te Runanga o Ngāti Ruanui leader Debbie Ngariwa Packer says the decision, which is part of a national review of coronial support services, is outrageous and has been made without consultation. Ms Ngariwa Packer says bereaved families going through the coronial process are already under stress without having to worry about where their loved one is being taken.
The fact that there's now uncertainty of where that person would have to go, how the family would mobilise to be a part of that process, and how long it would take to bring the person back to the grieving process that the family were going to apply, whether it's on a marae or through an undertaker, is what we're really concerned about.
Ms Ngariwa Packer says the move shows a blatant disregard for tikanga Māori and is a slight to all Taranaki whānau.
What this does is it horrifically interrupts and disables the family or disempowers the family to be able to manage their grief, to respectfully look after the person who's passed away and to stay close until the burial process. And I think, so from a tikanga perspective, it's hugely offensive.
Ms Ngariwa Packer says Ngāti Ruanui is seeking a meeting with the Justice Ministry to get clarity about what will replace the existing service. Rob Tucker's daughter Philippa died in 2009 when she fell from a bedroom balcony onto a concrete floor at a villa near Oakura on his sister Jackie's wedding night. Her death was referred to the coroner. Mr Tucker says it would have been unthinkable that at such a difficult time his daughter would have been taken away to Hamilton or Palmerston North.
It would be like Big Brother taking over and saying, well, you've got no more rights over the body. It's unfortunate she's died, but, we take over now. It's the law. And I think that could be rather insensitive, especially if the body is taken out of the province. I think that's terrible.
Mr Tucker says the decision smacks of penny pinching.
Anything a DHB can do to save money, or whoever they come under, the government anyway, they seem to be trying to do it. And yet in other areas they're spending millions. And maybe this is a consequence of that some of the core services are suffering.
But the Ministry of Justice says the Taranaki District Health Board did not respond to the tender process for coronial support services. It says in a statement it is finalising contracts with other providers, and where a post-mortem is required, it will be conducted in Hamilton or Palmerston North, and bodies will be returned to whānau in a timely manner. The Taranaki DHB Chief Executive, Rosemary Clements, says it only held a contract to provide a mortuary facility, so it didn't tender for coronial services. Ms Clements says coronial services are provided by pathologists contracted directly to the ministry. That was of no comfort to people in New Plymouth today, who were horrified at the prospect of bodies being shipped out of the region.
Having a married wife and the mother-in-law passing away, that's a big no-no.
Well, most families, particularly Māori families, want to actually be with their loved one.
That just seems wrong.
This is where I'm born and bred. To go out of town, it's not an option.
Certainly wouldn't want their deceased to be taken away to get checked out. It's just to come home to be put in a box and put down. They can do that here.
The Taranaki DHB says it will continue to provide a mortuary at the hospital, which will be used at times by the police. I ngā mutu mo te hōtaka o te ahi pō, ko Robin Martinaho.
Let's change the subject entirely with the time coming up to 27 minutes past 5. History will be made at Mount Smart Stadium tonight when the first female NRL team, National Rugby League team, takes the field in a curtain raiser against Auckland ahead of the Warriors match against the Newcastle Knights. And as Ravinda Hunia reports, that won't be the only historic moment, with the first mother and son combo set to take the field. Warriors second rower Isaiah Papali'i gets to watch his mum Lorena play first, and he reckons, so Lorena the mum's playing before Isaiah, and he reckons she might even be able to give him some tips.
The Women's Warriors are one of 4 female rugby league teams that will play alongside their male counterparts during this year's NRL final season, with both grand final matches to be played on the same field on the same night. Coach Luisa Avaiki, a former Kiwi Ferns captain, says it's excitement, not pressure, she feels ahead of tonight's match.
It'll be the first time that the fans see us and even the club people. And I know there should be pressure around that, but the way that we've gone about this team is that everything's about us. Even though all the external pressures are around us, we have to really focus on ourselves. The whole thing around this is, how does this warm-up game benefit us?
They'll compete against women's teams from the Brisbane Broncos, the Sydney Roosters and the St George Illawarra Dragons, and while the concept is new, their rivals are not. All 4 teams are littered with Kiwi Fern players, with some preferring to represent an Australian club. Notable centre Hani Hireme was a pick for the Warriors but signed to the Dragons, and captain Laura Mariu says it's not a choice she would have made, but players like her go with the club's blessing.
A little bit gut-wrenching because, you form those relationships with them, especially with Kiwi Ferns, and you've known them for years, but I'm really happy for them that they've been given an opportunity elsewhere and they're still playing the game. I look at it, the bigger picture. I believe it's a responsibility to help grow the game back home as opposed to going overseas.
Warriors veteran Isaac Luke will be celebrating his 250th NRL match tonight, majority of those played in Australia. And he says he's happy to see how far the women's game has come during his career.
I know they're keen to get out there and just be a part of this competition, because as a dream, for a woman it's hard to aspire to be an NRL player because you don't have that opportunity, but now that they do, hopefully we're going to have a lot of girls and to be able to follow in the women's footsteps.
It's a path a mother is also paving for her son. In another first, a mother and son will feature in the NRL. Second rower Isaiah Papali'i has played for the Warriors since 2017, and mum Lorena has come out of retirement to join the women's team.
Just seeing, all the hard work she's put in, I'm happy that
it's all coming true, and yeah, I can't wait to go out there. It'll be quite a big night for both of us. Have to watch Mum out there, see how she's going, and then take some tips from her footy game and try to take it into mine.
Warriors centre Simon Mannering hopes the inclusion will see the women's NRL roster added to in future.
There's not too many clubs that have got a women's team, but hopefully, in the next few years there's 16 women's teams aligned with NRL clubs running around and continue to grow our game. So it's a great achievement for the girls, and I'm sure they'll take full advantage of it.
Advantages that stretch further than those playing on the field. Female officials are queuing up for the chance to referee a top-tier match, while Warriors coach Avaiki becomes the first and only female head coach in NRL history.
We've kind of had to lead a lot of our teams, whether it's from club, whether it's provincial or international. We've always kind of been leading from the forefront ever since we've been playing. I'm not always comfortable with it, to be honest, but I know that in order for us to create opportunities and pathways for other women, that someone's got to go there first.
The official NRLW season kicks off in September during week 1 of NRL finals. Mo te hōtaka o te pō nei, ko Ravinda Hunia ahau.
You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Wasn't that beautiful, from the drums to the theme? I was just yelling at Jeremy, if you were watching. I'm thinking, why is his mouth moving? I was just saying to Jeremy, nice sound mix. Coming up on Checkpoint, who should foot the bill when tourists need rescuing? Rowing New Zealand's high-performance boss Ellen Cotter resigns. Gosh, there's been a few resignations at senior levels in New Zealand sport lately, and a New Zealander's first-hand video account of the utter devastation in Lombok. Plus a brilliantly talented 17-year-old. All of that and more before 6 o'clock. Nona's got business soon. We're hearing the latest on Fonterra, but before it all, Katrina Batten with the headlines.
They'd be good if I can see them. The Lumsden Rural Women's Network has reacted angrily to the Southern District Health Board's decision to close the township's birthing centre. It was announced today that the centre will be pared down to what it calls a maternal and child hub, where babies are delivered only in an emergency. Cheryl Clearwater, who chairs the network, says the birthing unit is a pillar of the community, and the closure shows a lack of understanding of how remote Lumsden is. A New Plymouth man whose daughter died 9 years ago says he cannot believe the Ministry of Justice will not renew its mortuary services contract at Taranaki Base Hospital. Rob Tucker says taking loved ones out of the region at such a difficult time is unthinkable, and the decision smacks of penny pinching at the cost of core services. The ministry is doing a national review of coronial support services and says it's sure the new service with post-mortems done in New Plymouth or Hamilton will be an improvement. The fire service says it's not known what caused a large blaze at the port of Tauranga this morning. Dozens of fire crews were called to the fire in a mechanical workshop and an office building next to it. Kevin Cowper of the Bay of Plenty Fire Service says there were no injuries and the fire is now under control. Internal Affairs Minister Tracy Martin has announced Mary Sholtons QC will lead the government inquiry into the appointment process of Deputy Commissioner of Police Wally Homaha. The inquiry's purpose is to examine, identify and report on the adequacy of the process that's led to the appointment of the Deputy Commissioner of Police. A former Auckland High School teacher accused of doing indecent acts on boys has been named as Benjamin Swan. Mr Swan, who denies 10 charges relating to 7 boys, was given name suppression at the Manukau District Court last September. He's been a teacher for 30 years and the school he taught at was at Otahuhu College. He'll be tried at the High Court in Auckland in April. And Wellington commuters heading north of Porirua face significant delays after a truck and trailer unit with a digger on board rolled at the Parramatta roundabout. State Highway 1 at the Parramatta train station is down to 1 lane until a tow truck with a crane is able to remove the truck and trailer. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks so much, Katrina. Not only did you not have them, they were updating as you went. That was nice work. Dairy giant Fonterra has been given a serious serve from its shareholders who say the double hit to their earnings this year is unacceptable. The cooperative suspended trading yesterday to adjust its forecast for what farmers will get for their milk. and shareholders will earn from their shares. It says farmers will get 5 cents less than expected. That's $6.70 per kilo of milk solids. But there's nothing more coming for shareholders this year. That's caused them to question whether those running New Zealand's largest company are doing a good enough job. Here's Rowan Quinn.
The group representing Fonterra shareholders wasn't holding back today, expressing their absolute disappointment at what they say is an unacceptable solution. The chairman of the Fonterra Shareholders Council, Duncan Cool, says the feelings of farmers he's spoken to range from anger to genuine concern about the state of the co-op.
Just really frustrating, to be brutally honest. Farmers get up every day and do all they can to do their bit for the co-op and supplying high-quality milk, and they expect the same of board and management at the other end.
Fonterra management's largely blaming the high cost of milk. Chief Financial Officer Mark Rivers says because it's so expensive, the cooperative's earning less money from every final product it sells at shop counters.
It's very strong, favourable demand environment out there, which is reflected in the higher milk price, but the challenge is how to be able to pass that along in all the various products that we sell, so that we're also capturing that margin at the cooperative level.
But the Shareholders Association says it's unfair that the co-ops held back on paying farmers to improve the balance sheet of the business. He says farmers know the co-ops had a tough year, losing hundreds of millions on its troubled Chinese being mate venture and having to pay out millions more in damages stemming from the 2013 botulism scare. But Mr Cool says Fonterra has some work to do to restore the confidence of shareholders.
We need to remember that this business of Fonterra is owned by 10,000 farming families up and down the country. So as you'd expect, some concern and wanting to ensure that their lives and livelihoods are on track, and the business gets back on track too.
Economist Cameron Bagri says the amount farmers will earn for their milk is still strong, and the 5 cent reduction merely the loss of a little of the cream off the top. But he says it's the dividend that's the real worry. Shareholders had already earned 10 cents per share and were expecting more, but Fonterra says now that won't be happening. Mr Bagri says there's only so much Fonterra can blame on the price of milk.
I think there's now going to be a few serious questions asked in regard to whether that pressure on margins is coming through costs or whether it's just a failure to execute on the strategy. Because, of course, we'd like to see that dividend payment number sort of going up over time. And what we've seen over the past sort of few years, that if anything, the trend has been downwards as opposed to upward.
And he says as one of the few truly big New Zealand companies, Fonterra's fortunes are not just important to farmers and shareholders.
If Fonterra is doing well, good dairy payouts, higher dividend payment, then that's going to filter through the broader economy. Rising tide lifts all boats. And I guess what we're seeing at the moment is that we're not seeing that rising tide.
Fonterra says it will release the final payments and the full details of its earnings on September the 13th. Before then, the Shareholders Association says those running the co-op can look forward to some challenging questions about its direction. For Checkpoint, Rowan Quinn, DNA.
Thanks, Ron. We're going to stay with business news and talk to Nona, who was beside me in the studio. Hi, Nona. Nona Peltier, card spending rose again last month. Oh, we got more Fonterra. Sorry, we got more Fonterra. I've lost that. Sorry. Pip's just going in my earpiece. What's happened to the next Fonterra? It's an entirely reasonable question. Fonterra says it's making the move away from coal, transferring one of its sites to electricity and abandoning plans for a Waikato mine. Last November, the company pledged to cut its greenhouse gas emissions by 30% by 2030 and set a target of zero net emissions by 2050. At an event this morning attended by the Environment Minister, David Parker, it announced a move from coal to electricity at its Stirling site in Otago. Its head of global operations, Robert Spurway, spoke with our reporter Tom Fairley.
Today we've made 2 significant announcements. The first is our plans to move ahead with electrification of our Stirling site. That means that we'll move from generation of industrial heat through coal to a renewable source being electricity.
The idea is to get away from coal altogether in future, is that?
Indeed, that is going to take some years. There are no viable alternatives in the South Island at the moment, so we're taking small steps to build on the biomass co-firing we do in the north of the South Island, the electrification we're now proceeding with at Stirling. But the second announcement we made today was the divestment of land we had at Mangatangi for coal mining and the fact that Fonterra no longer mines coal.
Have you abandoned the Mangatangi mine altogether?
I wouldn't say abandoned, but we've sold off that land and we've surrendered the permits associated with coal mining there. So no further plans to develop that into a coal mine.
Robert Spillway talking to Tom Furley. Where were we, Nona Peltz?
We were talking about electronic card spending.
Right. Card spending rose again last month by 0.5% to $7 billion in a month. What are people spending the money on? So that's FPOS and credit cards, is
Yeah,
it?
that's right.
Yep.
You know, debit cards.
Yep.
Basically not the cash that I like to use. I don't know. It's a lot of money. But what were they spending it on? They were spending it on mostly things that you consume, like fuel and food and drinks and fun stuff like that, and not so much on durable goods. So what are those, you might wonder? They're things like appliances and furniture and clothing too, things that would last. People have spent a lot less on that, and that dropped. So that's interesting because what does it mean? And the economists are looking at that and thinking, we would have expected a blip in July because of that families package that the government announced. You would have thought, hey, a bit more money in your pocket, you'd spend it. Well, it didn't transpire. So we'll see what happens with that. But overall, that's another sign that the economy is sluggish. We did have another indicator earlier today as well from the manufacturers, which indicated that manufacturing index was also down, trending down.
It's a sign also that people have been doing it tough, isn't it? That actually you get extra money and you're still spending it on consumables. It means you didn't have enough money for your consumables.
You're spending it on on the things you need every day and not the stuff that you might want to have in your home. So yeah, that's a problem. And of course, a lot of it is fuel, the rising price of fuel, and we've seen that come through as well. So yeah, no, I think it is tough. And the fact that we're not seeing economic growth is reflected in what the Reserve Bank governor was saying yesterday in terms of holding the official cash rate. And that's been...
By golly, hasn't there been a reaction to that in terms of the dollar? Indeed. So it has fallen 2% over the past day or so because ain't nobody going to make any money out of fixed interest in this country for a wee while. So what's going on?
Well, look, if you think about it, it's not such a bad story if you're a person who has debt because your interest rates are going to stay lower longer. If you're an exporter, it's good news too because you're going to be making more money and we're a big exporting nation. So it's not a bad news story necessarily. It depends on whether or not you're an importer. If you're relying on imported goods, it's going to cost you a bit more. If you're going overseas, it's going to cost you a bit more on a holiday or what have you. But on the other hand, it's not all about what's happening here in New Zealand. The US dollar is at a 13-month high.
Amazing.
So, and that's partly because of it's a different story there. Interest rates are rising, inflation is increasing, and so that's a separate issue. So we were in good company at the bottom there. It wasn't just us. I mean, the yen, the Swiss franc, the US dollar, they're all outperforming the market. So it's very hard for a small currency like New Zealand to hold up against that. So where are we at right now, you might ask?
I was just going to ask that, Nona.
I bet you were. 66.1 US cents. So that's like, you know, you were at 66.7 yesterday and we were down at over 1% at that point. So 89.8 Australian, that's quite lower than we've been for a while, and 51.5 pence. Now, the NZX Top 50 rose. Now, that's not surprising because interest rates are going to stay low, so that's good for companies. 0.8% up, 70 points to 9,010.
Nona Peltz, fantastic. Thank you. Have a great weekend, Nona.
And thank you.
The head of the Federated Mountain Club says a price should never be put on people's lives when contemplating mountain rescues. The rescue of an Australian soldier from Mount Aspiring last week is estimated to have cost more than $100,000, with helicopter services alone costing $4,000 per flying hour. Each year, New Zealand spends millions of dollars on ensuring the provisions are there to help out those who find themselves in need of rescue. How much is too much? Rachel Graham has more.
Australian soldier Terry Harch spent 4 freezing nights stuck on Mount Aspiring before a break in the weather allowed 2 helicopters to lift him and 4 members of the Wanaka Alpine Rescue crews, who had been sent in to help him, off the mountain. He and a friend were also rescued from Mount Tasman in 2013. Land Search and Rescue have acknowledged the most recent rescue was extensive and expensive, but the total cost is yet to be calculated. Ultimately, the bill for items such as the helicopter hire, meals, any broken equipment, will come back to the Rescue Coordination Centre, which is part of Maritime New Zealand. The manager of the Rescue Coordination Centre, Mike Hill, says that cost isn't and shouldn't be a factor in deciding the response to a rescue.
What would families be saying if someone had died, and the cost and the balancing these things out? You know, do we do as much as we can, we get to X figure and then say, well, we're going to stop now? No, of course we do as much as we can to rescue and save loved people in whatever circumstances they're in, regardless of how they got there.
Mr Hill says covering the cost of the rescue of a visitor from overseas is part of New Zealand's international obligations and bound by international conventions.
One of the principles is, you know, we will assist people in distress regardless of their nationality, their status, or the circumstances in which they were found. So, you know, picture in a worst-case situation, you know, an escaped criminal may need rescuing. If you look at what's happening in the Mediterranean right now, people are making decisions that are very, very risky to leave one country to go to another country, yet when they get in distress, they are saved.
Mr Hill says all but 1 or 2 countries worldwide have reciprocal arrangements to provide search and rescue services, but he says people need to do due diligence and check the specifics in some countries. Each year, the government funds the Rescue Coordination Centre to the tune of $5 million, with around $1 million of that spent on covering the bills, which come in as a result of the 1,000 rescues they're involved in annually. The government also provides $21 million to land search and rescue. Peter Wilson, the president of the Federated Mountain Club, says it would be a slippery slope to start considering the cost when deciding on the response to a rescue. Furthermore, he says most of the work involved in a rescue is done by volunteers.
Search and rescue in New Zealand is a voluntary system, so competent outdoor people give their time willingly and their employers give their time willingly to allow their people to participate in search and rescue organisations across New Zealand. I've always seen search and rescue as a bit of self-insurance, having been participated in rescues myself and been rescued myself. If you're an outdoors person, it's good to give back because one day you might need it yourself.
Mr Wilson says New Zealand has a world-leading search and rescue system, and he doesn't believe there is any need for major changes. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Rachel Graham.
New Zealand's high-performance sports community has lost several high-profile staff members this year, and another was added to that list today. Rowing New Zealand high-performance boss Alan Cotter confirmed his resignation to athletes and staff this morning, a decision which comes in the wake of a cultural review of the organisation. The news also comes just a month out from this year's World Champs in Bulgaria, although Cotter will stay on for that event. RNZ Sports reporter Clay Wilson is beside me here in the studio. Hi, Clay. To discuss Cotter's resignation. What prompted it, Clay?
The truth is we don't know for sure. We know that it came as a surprise. Cotter has been in this role for 10 years, very successful, and just yesterday they named their squad for the World Championships. What we do know is that Cotter is not talking and Rowing New Zealand Chief Executive Simon Peterson's not talking. I've contacted both of them this afternoon multiple times without success, but it does come after a review into the culture and setup at Rowing New Zealand. There's reports that success and medals are being prioritised over athlete welfare. So Cotter has overseen a lot of success, 5 Olympic champions between Rio and London, but perhaps it's come at a cost, it would appear.
And a shade of the vibe around the women's soccer team too, right? And this is a year in which we've seen several other high-performance people leave their roles in somewhat unusual circumstances.
Yeah, it appears that it's a case of athlete power coming to the fore here, and these reviews are becoming increasingly common, where athletes are having an influence, it would appear, on some people leaving their roles. You of course had David Kidwell earlier in the year with the Kiwis, Anthony Peden leaving Cycling New Zealand amid allegations of bullying, New Zealand football, 2 roles for the Football Ferns coach Andreas Haraf and the CEO, and just a couple of weeks ago Janine Southby in the Silver Ferns.
That's a big head count, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot, and you're only in, I guess, in August. So I guess coaches and staff who take a hard line with their expectation and demands, they're coming under the microscope a lot more here. Perhaps things you would have got away with 10 or 15 years ago, in society today you're not going to get away with them. So high performance sport in New Zealand, you would say, is undergoing something of an overhaul, really.
Yeah, fascinating. Is there any past evidence to support any of the claims that we're hearing here? What are we being told that is substantiated by what we already knew?
Yeah, well, Cotter has been very successful, as we've said, but his reign hasn't come without tinges of controversy. Eric Murray, part of the very successful men's pair, wrote in his book a couple of years ago that he was questioned over the choice to have his first child before the 2011 World Champs. Of course, Cotter would have been involved in that decision. Joseph Sullivan won gold at the 2012 Olympics in the men's pair, and then was pretty disappointed with the way he was treated after that. I quote, "Disappointed with the way I've been treated. They could have been more understanding, and I don't really feel wanted." So certainly some of the decisions that Cotter would have been heavily involved in weren't universally liked during his time.
Yeah, I do recall that. Do we expect this to have an impact on the New Zealand team at next month's World Champs?
Well, it's hard to say because we haven't really heard from Cotter or Peterson, so we don't know the climate in which it's been made in. But there'll certainly be an interesting dynamic given the circumstances. And I guess the next thing will be who replaces Cotter. Whoever replaces Cotter is going to step into those shoes. And I guess the other thing is, will this review be made public? A lot of the other reviews have been made public, so will we see what the results were? Because there's certainly some interesting reports about the climate it's been made in.
Nice work, Clay Wilson. And also, I need to say, on the record, nice work picking all 4 quarterfinal winners in the Super Rugby competition. I think that was the last time you were in the studio.
It certainly was.
Pick the Waratahs to beat the Highlanders. I didn't think that was going to happen at all. Yeah. Clay Wilson, a man who knows what he's talking about. Let's stick with sport, and a young woman called Kaina Andrews-Nahu, who is a weightlifter. Now, Kaina's still at school, Avondale College in West Auckland, but there's a sense of something really special about her. She's only been weightlifting for 4 years, but she's just been picked to represent New Zealand at the Youth Olympics in Argentina in October, and she's already won gold in 3 separate age divisions of the Oceania World Weightlifting Champs. And wait, there's more. We'll let Kaina tell you it herself. How many New Zealand weightlifting records has Kaina broken?
I've broken about 123.
Quite extraordinary. And you've won events that aren't youth events, right? You've won events in senior competitions.
Yes, I have.
And what's your favourite? Do you like the clean and jerk or the snatch or both?
I like the snatch.
And why is that?
I think it just comes down to the technique, really. I kind of struggle with the clean and jerk, so the technique for the snatch just comes a lot better for me.
You got into this when you were 13. When did you start thinking, I might be okay at this? This might be something I can be really good at. When did that occur to you?
After my first competition, I was selected to go to a weightlifting federation in New Caledonia, which is still being run. But I went to that camp, and after that I came back to New Zealand, and I really took a liking to it.
And at that camp, people suggested to you that you should start taking this really seriously, right? And that was when someone gave you Richie Patterson's name, is that right?
Yes, it is.
And I've interviewed him before, and he is weightlifting is his thing, right? So is he a fantastic coach?
Amazing. I absolutely love being one of Richie's athletes because obviously he trains me with physical, aspects of weightlifting, but through that, it kind of built my mental strength as well. Kind of like 2 birds, 1 stone kind of thing.
Yeah. And also the thing I noticed about him was a really lovely, quiet sense of self-belief. He's not at all up himself, but also he knew that he could do it, right? And is that what he's giving to you, a sense of possibility?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's one thing to be an athlete and experience it and then put it into your coaching as well. So, yeah.
And so what are your dreams, Kaina, at the age of, what are you, 17 and a half? Or how old are you exactly?
I'm 17 and I turn 18 in January next year.
Right. And so already heading off to Argentina for the Youth Olympics, having set 123 national records, everything's possible, really. What do you dream of doing?
It might sound a little bit cliche, but I dream to be like my coach. He's a successful weightlifter, went to many Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games, and he's also a very successful businessman. So I really look up to him for that, and I'd love to be just kind of give back to the community and, maybe coach some people later on in life, be as successful as he is.
They're pretty fantastic ambitions. He won a gold at the Commonwealth, didn't he, Richie, from memory? That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Right, and he lifted the Olympics. And as you say, he's successful outside weightlifting. You are year 13 at school, so you must be pretty clever as well as a talented athlete. You're doing all right.
Say that.
You're doing all right in your NCEA.
I'm passing, so
yeah. Go Canis. So okay, so you dream of lifting for New Zealand at the Olympics?
Definitely, of course, yes.
Yeah. Well, we can't wait to see what becomes of you. How exciting is it to be going to Argentina?
Very. It's one of the biggest events that I've ever been to. One of the biggest privileges that I've had as an Olympic weightlifter so far.
And what's the event you think you've got the best chance in, so we can all cheer you on?
I'm hoping overall, but maybe more so in the snatches.
Well, good luck, Kana. Good luck with everything.
Thank you so much.
Kana Andrews-Nahu, 123 New Zealand records. She's broken national records. Age 17 and 3/4. Ngāti Porou, I think. We wish her well. The Trump administration has announced plans for a new separate US Space Force as a sixth service of the military by 2020. CBC's Keith Bogue filed this report from Washington.
The Space Force. Does that make sense?
Donald Trump first raised the idea in front of the Army Academy football team in May.
The Space Force, General. You probably haven't even heard that. I'm just telling you now.
It quickly became a crowd pleaser at Trump rallies.
Said maybe we need a new force. We'll go with the Space Force. And I was not really serious. And then I said, what a great idea. Maybe we'll have to do it.
It made for juicy satire, and talk shows leapt on it, lampooning both Trump and his supporters.
But down here in Trump country, they only wanted to talk about one thing.
Space Force. We need it.
Space Force. Making space great again.
There was just one question.
What is Space Force?
Something we've been missing for a long time.
But it wasn't a joke to Trump.
Space is a war-fighting domain, just like the land, air, and sea.
And so today the vice president announced the administration's decision.
The time has come to establish the United States Space Force.
And have it up and running by the year 2020, said Pence.
As President Trump has said in his words, it is not enough to merely have an American presence in space. We must have American dominance in space. And so we will.
Pentagon brass and the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, were all on the record last year saying they don't want a sixth branch of the armed forces. They're fine with the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, and Coast Guard, and together they're already keeping an eye on space without adding the bureaucratic weight that would come with a new branch of service. But listen to how Secretary Mattis walked around the question this week.
We are in complete alignment with the President's concern about protecting our assets in space to contribute to our security, to our economy, and we're going to have to address it.
What he did there was say the Pentagon agrees that Trump has put his finger on the problem without saying a word about whether Trump has put his finger on the solution. But the Pentagon's still in a tough spot, says former Secretary of the Air Force Deborah Lee James.
I think they're now stuck because what's happened in the intervening 6 months is that the President of the United States has simply said, do it. And that, by the way, took everyone by surprise.
There was a whiff of ceremony about the announcement today that ignored an important and awkward fact. Congress would have to approve the creation of a Space Force, and an election that could change who has power in Congress is just a couple of months away.
Keith Bogue from CBC reporting from Washington. 2 minutes to 6, some feedback. You can always text us on 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And don't forget, of course, we are on Twitter, and we have a really engaged and engaging Facebook community on the Checkpoint Facebook page. So, presumably supermarket prices will go down if the ban is saving them all those millions of buying those bags. Nope, says one text. We have to stop buying plastic altogether. Everything we use, also the black plastic rubbish sacks are a disgrace. Use paper ones from Pack and Save, or better stop creating rubbish altogether, says Rowan. Hi John, why does wee little New Zealand let people come here and not have insurance for emergencies? Yet when we travel, we take out our own insurance in case of emergency, asks somebody. And from the email department, hi John, stopping the use of plastic checkout bags is an attractive piece of window dressing. by my reckoning, it's the equivalent of just 2 days of Auckland rubbish going to landfill. It's an emotional response to what is in reality a litter issue, says Richard. Thank you for your feedback. We really appreciate it. My 17-year-old daughter is doing environmental studies at school, and we've started composting as part of her project to see how much weight we produce each week in compostable produce or material or whatever. Sorry, I'm doing Year 13 students at Western Springs College a radical disservice. But, by golly, there is a hell of a lot of material going into our compost bin. I'm absolutely fascinated, and I'm ashamed and appalled and embarrassed to say that we've been chucking it out prior to now. So those of you who are suggesting we can produce less rubbish, well, the household I'm part of is certainly verifying that. Thank you for your feedback. We really appreciate it. Sorry I'm having coughing fits, and well done to those people who are in the studio who are talking to me, and just keep on talking as I go to the corner and cough, Katrina Batten.
Do you take your plastic to the recycling?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten. A former Crown lawyer has been appointed to run the inquiry into Wally Homaha's appointment as Deputy Police Commissioner. The Internal Affairs Minister, Tracy Martin, has just announced that Mary Sholtons will look into the adequacy of the process. The government's first choice to run the inquiry, Pauline Kingi, pulled out 9 days ago after questions were raised about a conflict of interest. The terms of reference for the inquiry haven't changed, but it will now begin on August the 20th with a timeframe of 6 weeks. Ms Martin says Ms Sholtons is a respected QC who's worked in public and administrative law for 36 years, including as Crown Counsel at the Crown Law Office for a decade. Retail New Zealand says many businesses are moving towards being plastic-free anyway, so it doesn't expect a ban to come as a shock. The government today announced it will phase out plastic bags over the next year, with the expectation that they'll no longer be in use by July 2019. Retail New Zealand's General Manager of Public Affairs, Greg Harford, says the move has been driven by public sentiment, with many people already using environmentally friendly alternatives when they go shopping. He says businesses are either following suit or taking matters into their own hands to encourage reusable bags.
We've seen big grocery stores, department stores, hardware stores move, but also right down into small business land. We've seen small Indian spice shops in Dunedin get rid of bags and institute alternatives.
Greg Harford of Retail New Zealand. The Southern DHB's decision to close the Lumsden maternity centre despite strong local protest has provoked anger, dismay and disappointment. The board announced today the centre will become a maternal and child hub where babies are delivered only in an emergency. Earlier this year, protesters marched down the main street of the Southland township and a 4,000 signature petition was gathered. The chair of the Lumsden Rural Women's Network, Cheryl Clearwater, says today's decision shows the board doesn't understand how remote Lumsden is, and she's urging it to reverse its decision. She says she'd like to see women in government who are having babies travel an hour while in labour to give birth. A decision by the Ministry of Justice not to renew its mortuary services contract at Taranaki Base Hospital is being met with disbelief. The decision, part of a national review of coronial support services, means future post-mortems will be done in Palmerston North or Hamilton. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
Ngāti Ruanui leader Debbie Ngariwa Packer says the decision has been made without public consultation and shows a blatant disregard for tikanga. She says the last thing bereaved families need to worry about is where their loved one is and when they will be returned. The ministry says the Taranaki District Health Board did not tender for the contract. It says it's confident the new arrangement will strengthen the relationship between coroners and families. Ko Robin Martin tēnei.
Mexico's president-elect says he'll abandon the Secret Service-style protection used by his predecessor in favour of a security detail of 20 unarmed men and women, including lawyers, doctors and engineers. Since his landslide election win last month, Andrés Manuel López Obrador has painted himself as an everyman leader, foregoing the traditional trappings of the presidency. He says 10 men and 10 women, called facilitators, will be chosen to provide his security. They'll not carry firearms and protection will be kept at a minimum. The outgoing president, Enrique Peña Nieto, is protected by 2,000 armed guards. The parents of America's First Lady, Melania Trump, have become United States nationals. Victor and Amalia Knaus from Slovenia were granted citizenship at a ceremony in New York under a process President Trump wants to scrap. The BBC's Daniel Mann reports.
Victor and Amalia Knaus have been spending much of their time in the US. Their lawyer told the New York Times that Melania Trump, who became an American citizen in 2006, sponsored them for their green cards. These allow foreign nationals to live and work permanently in the US and eventually apply for citizenship. President Trump calls this chain migration. Last November he tweeted, "Some people come in and they bring their whole family with them, who can be truly evil." Mr. Trump wants to replace the green card system with a merit-based one that favours better educated, English-speaking professionals over relatives.
Daniel Mann reporting. It's 5 minutes past 6. Sport. The All Blacks assistant coach Ian Foster says, excluding the absence of 2 key players still recovering from injury, the squad is in good shape ahead of the Rugby Championship. Before the first Bledisloe Cup test in Sydney next weekend, there's a game against a combined Canterbury-Otago side in Christchurch tonight.
At the moment we're sitting on Colsey and Sonny, the 2 documented injuries, and the rest of the boys, there's a few niggles, but ultimately look pretty good. And, we had a good camp last week and got some good work into the team. I think we've come in a nice position, but plenty of work to be done for next Saturday.
Ian Foster. Tonight's game kicks off at 6:30. The Warriors will be playing for security on the NRL ladder when they host the Newcastle Knights in Auckland tonight. 4 points clear in 8th position. They'd get some extra breathing room over the chasing pack if they beat the 11th place visitors. Veteran forward Simon Mannering says all the focus has been on their own game after some inconsistent performances.
We can't keep waiting till we have a bad loss to sort of spark us back to life. So, yeah, hopefully that is the last lesson. I can't promise anything, but I do know this is a very tough competition from team number 16 all the way to the top. So we take nothing for granted week to week, and we just got to make sure we're improving our performance.
Simon Mannering, and that game kicks off at 8 o'clock. Alan Cotter will stay on as Rowing New Zealand's high performance manager for next month's World Championships in Bulgaria, despite unexpectedly resigning today in the wake of a review of the organisation's culture. That's the news.
On Media Watch this weekend, a fury over fake news.
You'll never win! Never!
And the frenzy over free speech.
She's out to warn people about what she calls the dangers of multiculturalism.
There were even calls for our program to be boycotted.
When did New Zealand become such free speech stiflers?
All that and why the world's worst humanitarian crisis is often overlooked in our news. That's Media Watch, after 9 on Sunday morning with Wallace Chapman on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula mainly fine with areas of morning fog. However, isolated showers in Northland today, spreading elsewhere tomorrow. Waikato, Waitomo, Taumaranui, Bay of Plenty and Taupo, fine apart from areas of morning fog. Taranaki to Kapiti, also Taihape, isolated showers clearing tonight, fine tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington. A few showers spreading north to reach Hawke's Bay by evening and Gisborne tomorrow morning, then clearing south of Napier. For all of the South Island, mostly fine but isolated showers about Nelson and Marlborough today and areas of morning fog or low cloud tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, rain clearing this afternoon but remaining cloudy. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina.
With Coffee John Campbell.
Yes, sorry everyone. Have a wonderful weekend, Katrina.
You too.
Thank you, I will. The United Nations has condemned an airstrike by the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen, which has killed 43 people, including 29 children, at least 29, and is calling for an urgent investigation. The airstrike hit a school bus. It may in fact be a passenger truck, really, in rebel-held part of the country's north. Footage after the attack showed wounded children, some with their school backpacks still on, being taken to hospital. The Saudi-led coalition, which is backing the Yemeni government with support from the US and the UK in its war with Houthi rebels, says the strike was part of a legitimate operation. The BBC's chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who reports regularly from Yemen, has more.
School bags on their backs, shock in their eyes, children who'd been heading for a day out. A Yemeni child's day ends like this all too often. many in hospital beds. Today, 3 to a bed, and many more dead. This man says an airstrike in the market targeted the children's bus. Our shops were open, he says. Shoppers were just walking around. But the Saudi-led coalition says it targeted missile launchers, taking aim at Saudi cities, accusing the Houthis of using children as human shields.
We cannot accept high civilian casualty in Yemen. The civilian people, they are not our target. Our strategic objective is to get back the legitimate government, which is recognized by the international community.
An ugly proxy war in a country teetering on the brink of collapse. I asked the UN's envoy, what if this war doesn't stop?
Collapse. And massive, massive humanitarian suffering in Yemen, and the effect of that on the region, a possible increase in terrorist activities in Yemen.
Al-Qaeda, Islamic State.
So a failed state in Yemen has extraordinary consequences for the region and the wider region and beyond. For that reason, we need to act now.
Yemen is already the world's worst humanitarian crisis. More of its people rely on food aid like this than anywhere else in the world. Millions on the verge of starving. A people desperate for peace, but many doubtful.
The warring sides don't want stability for Yemenis or for the Yemeni people to be masters of their own fate.
We have had countless rounds of talks. They all failed. But the situation in Yemen is now so bad. Maybe there is a glimmer of hope that this conflict can be resolved.
Mr. Griffiths believes all sides are now ready for a political solution. The attacks are continuing, and the Saudi-led coalition is backed by the United States, by Britain, by France, providing weapons, providing support.
That's something we'll be discussing in Geneva. My job is to provide the opportunity for the people of Yemen to sit down and talk peace. That's what we're here for, and we're here to do it in a way that's consistent with Security Council resolutions, which include the requirement for disarmament and withdrawal of forces. And that's the best answer, in my view, to the question about armaments on either side.
Houthi rebels, trained and armed by Iran, are still fighting too. Both sides say they're ready to attend talks in Geneva next month. The first in 2 years, after 2 failed rounds. If they keep failing, Yemen itself will fail.
There was the BBC's Lise Doucette reporting. It's 12 minutes past 6. Earlier in the programme, we heard about the closure of Lumsden Maternity Centre in Southland, a primary birthing facility which provides birthing and postnatal care to women in the Lumsden and Taranaki areas. Locals are outraged at the decision. In fact, we've just received an email from Joe which says, and I quote, "The decision to downgrade the centre is devastating for our remote rural community here in Taranaki. The DHB have been shown to have used inaccurate birthing statistics and have made a decision that will put the lives of mothers and babies at risk. Their decision defies any practical or ethical reasoning. It's time for the government to step in now and save the centre before it's too late." That's just an example of the kind of feedback we're getting on this. But the loss of the facility will potentially have another impact as well. As we've covered this year, midwives say they're overworked and exhausted, and the money they receive from the Ministry of Health isn't enough to pay them a decent wage and cover the costs of operating in areas where expectant mums can be a very, very large distance apart. Lumsden midwife Sarah Stokes told me the closure of the centre is going to greatly increase her workload, and she's now considering other options. I asked her what she's thinking about doing.
Look, I'd really like to continue to provide maternity services in the area for families, John. I've been a health professional since 1995 as a nurse before I was a midwife. I want to continue to provide safe care. It needs to be sustainable for me and my family, and I don't think it will be if all my intrapartum care is going to be outside of my local area. So, yeah, at this stage, strongly looking at other options for...
Sarah, sorry to interrupt, but can you explain that to me? So you say it's got to be sustainable for you and your family, and if you're going to do care outside your locum area, what are you talking about? That you're going to have to spend an enormous amount of time on the road as the LCM. So you will be travelling a lot and I guess accruing all sorts of extra costs as well. Is that what the concern is?
Exactly. Like I know that, you featured the Dear David campaign earlier this year. All my clients live in rural and remote rural. I already do great distances. Tiredness is a big thing. Time off is a big thing. Yeah, I just don't think it's going to be sustainable.
So having Lumsden as a primary care facility at least gave you periods where you were able to work relatively close to home and were able to base yourself somewhere.
Yeah. And I also know that I've got the support of the primary unit facility midwife that's on. So if I happen to be in Invercargill looking after a woman who has to be induced, her labour has to be induced, or she's got a complication where she has to be in a hospital setting, if I have some urgent or emergency incident in the northern Southland or Fiordland area, I know I can call on that facility midwife at Lumsden to see the woman, give the woman reassurance, check them over. I'm not stressed because I know she's being looked after while I'm providing care, more than an hour away. That's not going to be possible if Lumsden closes.
Right, so two questions. The first is looking back. What sort of distances can you do in a busy and demanding week now, and what sort of hours can you do in a bad week? And that's with Lumsden being available as a primary facility. What's a bad week look like?
Well, I'm on call 24/7. I haven't had a holiday for 2 years, but I am about to, so really looking forward to that. Look, I've had occasions where I've had maybe 4 hours sleep over 3 days.
And this will get worse rather than better when you don't have the primary facility in Lumsden.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's look forward, because you said before that you were considering your options. Are you thinking of moving out of the region?
Potentially. Like I do have my nursing qualification as well, so maybe go back to nursing. I've previously worked in a neonatal unit and done rural practice nursing and emergency work. So look, the options are open. We've been in this area for 20 years. We're invested in this area. I have a passion for rural health, but I don't think the DHB, really respect rural services. Yeah, we're just going backwards if they close Lumsden.
So if they close Lumsden and women, and you said from Taranaki, may have to drive for 2.5 hours potentially.
Yeah.
So babies that come early, there's a due date and the baby comes a week or 10 days earlier, and there is the waters break and there's a sudden rush to the hospital. There is the potential for women not to make it, right?
Exactly. Probably there's been 4 women this year that I can clearly recall that have just driven to Lumsden, which would have been an hour away from them, and they could have easily given birth pulling up in the car park.
And so if Lumsden isn't there, if there's not a facility available for them, then you are going to have babies arriving in cars? Is that a realistic possibility?
I believe so, John, or it's going to put extra pressure on our other services like St John's, even the volunteer fire brigade. They often get called for medical calls if St John's are out of the area, not available. It's just going to put pressure on not just the lead maternity care and midwives in the area, but all the other services as well.
Sarah Stokes, who is a midwife, as you heard, working in that wider Lumsden area. We would love your feedback on it. Text us 2101. A New Zealander living in Indonesia has given a first-hand account of the utter devastation in Lombok following last Sunday's quake, which killed 259 people and has left tens of thousands of people homeless. John Braithwaite runs the Broken Compass Hotel and Bar on Gili Trawangan Island. He was celebrating a wedding reception with family and friends when the quake struck and has now travelled to Lombok, where he's staying with his pregnant wife and her family in a makeshift camp. John toured the village of Ganga with his camera to capture the destruction and to highlight the desperate need for international help.
We're at having a little wedding reception. Belated wedding reception at Gili Teak on the sunset side, the west side of the island. So we had my wife, her friends, my family there, and we were all sort of enjoying the evening. And then yeah, small sort of 5-second. Small 5-second shake. Well, it wasn't too small, and then after about sort of 5 seconds or so, just a big shake that kind of threw you side to side, and then that lasted for a good sort of, let's say, 5 seconds, and then maybe a little bit of an aftershock after that. So the whole thing, I think, what felt like maybe, I don't know, 10 seconds or so in total, maybe a little bit less. Yeah, it was pretty strong. So then the power went straight out, straight away. There was thoughts of like tsunami. So we all got together, all family got together, and we made our way up the hill. Once the tsunami warning was lifted, we got together. Few of the blokes did the manly thing and went down the hill, searching through the rubble of the streets and stuff like that. Went to my house, Broken Compass, Compass Divers, and Bonnie's house, grabbed some supplies, blankets, water and stuff like that. Got back up the hill and stayed the night on the hill. And yeah, all night was a rough night. Lots of little aftershocks, lots of big ones. And then yeah, once the sun came up, us and probably the rest of the whole island got down off the hill and started getting all of our stuff and tried to get off the island. And that was another mission in itself. Obviously, the government was trying to do as much as they could, but yeah, you know, they've got families and stuff like that that needed looking after. So it was a bit of a shit show. I think getting everybody off the island was a bit of a shit show, but at the same time, I can understand where the locals were coming from and why it took a little bit longer than what it should. Yeah, eventually we got everybody off the island, all the family and friends and tourists and stuff like that got off the island, and then I came over to Lombok and brought Dewi over here with her family, and that was the first time that we sort of saw a lot of the local devastation and what happened in Lombok, and houses have just been leveled. We'll go for a bit of a walk now and I'll show you guys kind of some of the houses, what's been done here. So this is in my wife's village. You got houses like that, which as you can see, you know, like that's a pillar, that's a post there that's supposed to be holding up this roof and a structural part of the building, and it's probably less than 100 mil by 100 mil. This one here, yeah, just everything just falls in. It's like I don't know, it's like a house made from cardboard. but that's all that they can afford, you know. These people don't make lots of money. They can't afford to have big, strong houses. Flattened, gone. And this is just street after street after village after village. Everything is just flattened. So my heart goes out to these people. There's going to be months and months before they start rebuilding. We'll just go out onto the main road here and have a look. We've got the this looks like a rescue team or an engineering team here that are trying to sort out some power. Hello. Hello. So these guys look like they're doing some electrical work, trying to get power back on. The one really shitty thing with all of this is, like, basically you've got a house like this that's completely knocked down, and there's possessions and clothes and all that sort of stuff within the house, but people are too scared to go in, obviously, for fear of aftershocks and things like that. So they leave the house how it is, but then you've got assholes from other parts of the island, other parts of the country that are coming and kind of ransacking, looting the houses. So everyone here is on edge. Everyone's super tense about people coming in and trying to steal shit. There's money in houses. There's gold. There's
Hello, mister.
Hello.
What are you doing?
Ini saya mau bikin video.
Video
sama
ya.
Teman di luar,
ya,
biar mereka tahu gimana kondisi di sini. Berharap
ya.
Ada.
Okay.
So he was just basically, yeah, thank you, bro. He was basically just saying that they need, everybody here needs tarpaulins, tents, water. It's really hard to get good water here because the rivers, a lot of the rivers aren't that clean. A lot of the wells are dried up, and it's pretty hard to get good clean water. The government hasn't done a huge amount. Again, it's pretty early days, but these locals here are hoping that the government will bring more water and food. The government's dropped off like instant noodles and that sort of stuff, but nothing really that's going to help these guys out too much. This is just within like maybe a 200-300 meter square area, and this is a little village, nothing compared to like a bigger town like Tanjung or Pemenang. But this is this is another thing that's getting the locals, is that somewhere like this, you know, there's lots of looting and people trying to steal belongings and things like that. Every night that I stay in this tent with Dewi and her family, everybody carries a big stick or a or a samurai sword. Dewi's brother's got 2 samurai swords and they walk around with samurai swords. Oke dah, makasih ya buat informasi.
Iya.
Ini saya mau. Ya, ini saya mau. Okay. All right, so I'm really walking through it now. Last few days just been back and forth from the island, trying to get as much stuff out of Broken Compass and bring it to the staff as possible. a lot of Westerners have left. There's a lot that are still there, and they're kind of like business owners and people that have got houses there that want to look after everything and make sure that there's not too much looting, because there are some nasty people on the island that are trying to take advantage of what's going on. So yeah, there's a lot of people that are still there, a lot of people that want to make sure everything is okay, but yeah, it's tough.
New Zealand to John Braithwaite in the village of Gunga in northern Lombok. John has started a GoFundMe page to raise money for the people left homeless. The scale of the devastation, the extent of the devastation, quite extraordinary. That is Checkpoint for this week. On behalf of the wonderful Checkpoint team, thank you so much for your company. We hope you have a fantastic weekend, and we look forward to talking to you again Monday, 5 o'clock here on RNZ National.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Former Crown Solicitor Mary Sholton's QC will replace Pauline Kingi as the head of an inquiry into Wally Homaha's appointment as a Deputy Police Commissioner. Retail New Zealand does not expect businesses to be put out by a plan announced today to ban plastic bags within a year, as many are already phasing them out. The Lumsden community is still hoping the Southern DHB will reverse its decision to close the township's birthing centre, despite strong local protest. And a Ngāti Ruanui leader says a decision not to keep mortuary services at Taranaki Base Hospital shows a blatant disregard for tikanga. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Country Life this week is meeting a Northland couple who grow kiwi fruit, lemons, mandarins, grapes for wine. They have a fruit pack house, interests in a fruit export business, and